from the News Channel 5 Network. This is OpenLine.
Good evening to you and welcome. Thank you for joining us for OpenLine tonight. I am Carrie Sharp and we have a guest that you will all recognize and hopefully appreciate, Dr. Thomas Schwartz here from Vanderbilt University. Dr. Schwartz, we're talking about politics all around the world today, and really it always impacts the U.S. in some form, fashion, or another. We want to remind you this is OpenLine. This is your chance to call in, ask questions of Dr. Schwartz, and we'll get those answered and just have a great conversation tonight. I do want to start with what it seems like you can't miss across the TV networks this week, and that is the death of the Queen and the new King.
Yes.
And, you know, I think in general we see so much respect for the monarchy. We are seeing stories of just, you know, this long 70-year reign. But that is not the case for everybody, and that has to be addressed. And it seems like with this change, with her death, there is a louder push against what the monarchy has stood for over time. Would you agree?
Yes, and I would agree that people, the Queen was such a symbol and had been in place so long that I think the fact that she is not there and that Charles, who is a much more controversial, or at least a figure who's had certainly his share of both scandal, his outspokenness on many issues, that's going to produce a change. I think Charles, a lot will depend on how he handles things, how he behaves. I'm not sure that it's going to actually lead to any great fragmentation or, say, for example, Commonwealth countries leaving the Commonwealth or that. But it's going to be different. Charles is a different figure than his mother. And I think people all know that he has certain strong views on various subjects. It will be different. Yeah. And I think a lot will depend in some ways on the acceptance within the UK itself of him as monarch.
Even during Queen Elizabeth II's time, we saw the monarchy shrink. I think about 20 countries left.
Yes.
And would you anticipate that to continue?
Not in the same direction. I think a lot of countries left that had very thin relationship with Britain, not a very dense or historical one. So, you know, countries like Canada, Australia, they're likely to remain. They're still very much tied to the idea of having a head of state like the king, and seeing that in their symbolic as part of their origin stories, in effect. So I don't think we're going to see a rush to the exits again. But there's a possibility, of course, of one or two countries deciding they don't want to be part of the Commonwealth anymore. And
of course, you talk about the monarchy and the reign as part of your own teaching at Vanderbilt.
Yes. Yeah, no, we, you know, the United States got started. The Declaration of Independence was deliberately designed to attack King George, even though many of the things that had happened to the colonists had actually happened because of Parliament. We attacked King George in the Declaration of Independence. We made monarchy the direction or the symbol of what we wanted not to be. Right. Famously, George Washington insisted on being Mr. President, not having any sort of exalted title. And much of the 30, 40 years after the Revolution, a lot of our politics centered around whether we were going to be a monarchy again, and arguments over the idea of elevating the president in that manner or being too close to Great Britain. And we fought another war with Great Britain in 1812 in order to demonstrate our independence. So we had this very interesting relationship in our early years. But then after that period, much of the 19th century and then certainly into the 20th century, the United States has grown very close to Great Britain. Our power relationship has changed. We are now the senior power, but Britain has remained an enormously influential country in the United States in terms of cultural and other aspects of its direction. Americans care about Britain. They travel to it. They are obsessed with the monarchy.
You look at all the shows like The Crown. I mean, they're so popular. We have a fascination with it.
We still have that. And in fact, in in diplomacy and actually in intelligence gathering, the United States has a very close relationship with Britain, something called the Five Eyes, in which the British, Canadians, Australians, and New Zealanders are all part of an intelligence network. We have a very close relationship on issues of nuclear weapons, where we share information and intelligence. The United States and Britain are actually fairly closely bound together in so many ways that many people don't appreciate.
But not particularly when it comes, knee-deep into politics and how it could impact us politically.
Yes.
This change, I should say.
That's correct. I mean, I don't think in terms of actual political change, no. But in terms of institutions of state and some of the things we do in foreign policy, there's a very close coordination within the apparatus of the State Department, the Foreign Office, the MI6, CIA, these sorts of things. But at the political level, no, the politics, although, we are influenced, American political consultants go over to Britain and work in their campaigns and have modeled some of the ideas of New Labor were something that were picked up from Bill Clinton's Democratic Leadership Council. There are Brexit, of course, is thought to have been a sort of forerunner of Trumpism in this country. So even though we're separate, we influence each other a great deal, or at least the perception is that we have a great deal of influence on each other.
I have to ask you this, and not that it relates to U.S. politics, but you eat, sleep, breathe, teach politics. The Queen has always been regarded as someone who did not share a political opinion.
Yes.
Ever. Prince Charles most certainly has, and has spoken out on divisive topics like climate change and other things. I guess just from your opinion, as someone now who is the king, how will this impact his reign?
It will make him, he will be seen as having a stronger stance on some issues. The perception will be there. Whether he decides he's going to articulate it and actually, in some manner, seek to influence prime ministers, I think is very doubtful. I think if Britain, for example, right now, has a prime minister who wants to cut energy costs, even if that might mean that climate goals might not be met, I don't think he's going to do anything about it. He doesn't have that type of power. It is different from the Queen, but I don't think it'll be, my own sense from his first speeches and his what he seems to be signaling is that he is going to step back from being as outspoken as he was as a prince.
That he is now indeed in a new role and looking at things a little bit differently. We'll wait and see. Something that you have also been watching very closely and does impact the U.S. in a number of ways is the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And you said we're really perhaps at a pivotal point.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we know, and it's been very clear in the last week or so, that the Ukrainians have made substantial gains, particularly in the northeast part of the country, where they seem to have caught Russian troops by surprise, and they've been able to regain a substantial amount of territory. Not huge, but it's certainly enough that even Russia is acknowledging that they've had to retreat and pull back. And on social media, among people who are monitoring Russian social media, particularly bloggers who are concerned with military events, they're panicked and they're angry that their soldiers have retreated. There are stories in the Washington Post today that were picked up of Russian soldiers abandoning their military equipment, fleeing, leaving their uniforms in a sort of rout, like just wanting to get out of there. And this difference in the morale between the two armies, the Ukrainians having a very strong morale defending their country versus the Russian conscripts and others who have had to fight, who have not, who often were not even told what they were supposed to be doing when they were sent. This is all very interesting, and it does create the possibility of further collapses in the Russian position, which could be extraordinarily damaging to Vladimir Putin. In Russian history, military defeat has often been a thing that has produced political change at home. The revolution of 1905, 1917 were all precipitated by military defeats. And in that sense, if Putin could be very dangerous in this regard because he knows that history, and he might escalate the conflict in order to avoid damaging political defeat.
And we all know, I mean, it's just simple fact, Putin has an ego. He does not want to lose here.
Well, it's not only does he want to, he may not be able to. That losing would be the end of his regime. In that sense, the fear that he would have of a defeat that would register with the Russian people might be such that he couldn't accept it. In which case, people fear that he might be willing to both escalate the level of violence and then even use tactical nuclear weapons.
What does it say about Ukraine, its leadership, and its people that they are in this position right now?
Well, what it does say is, well, something we've known fairly early on, that the Ukrainians themselves never accepted the idea that they were part of Russia. They have had a difficult time establishing an independent and coherent democratic state. They had a lot of problems, a lot of issues with corruption, but there does seem to have been, in the 30 years that they've been independent, a growing national consciousness that has even been greater with Russian aggression against Crimea in 2014. This seems to have produced a much stronger sense of nationhood and a willingness to sacrifice and to fight for their nation. And their cooperation with NATO, their working with Western powers, their ability to use sophisticated weaponry in targeting Russian targets and stopping the attempt to conquer the country. The fact that Zelensky did not flee the country when the Russians invaded, this was crucial. And it does seem to indicate that they are becoming, have identified and become a nation, in which case the whole argument of Putin for the invasion flounders and fails.
Well, and I may be getting too far ahead of myself here in this whole conflict, but does it bolster its desire to be included in the European Union?
Absolutely.
To say we're relevant,
Absolutely.
we're here.
And the EU has actually now indicated that it will accept a membership application from Ukraine. What's still uncertain is NATO, but the longer the war goes on and the more effective the Ukrainians are, I think NATO membership becomes almost something that will be almost automatic by the end of the conflict.
All right, on that note, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more of our conversation. Stay with us.